Hello.
Hello?
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going good. What about you?
Hey, it's Brian. You're listening to The Crown.
Pretty good, thanks. A little hectic.
Yeah, long day.
And we've got a new style of episode for you today.
Definitely. I got to work
Me
a
too.
different job tonight, too, so I'm just kind of like, I'm glad we could fit this in.
I've been working with the Clash Royale subreddit and the team that runs the daily discussion.
Yeah, fitting a podcast in between shifts.
Yeah.
So what we're going to be doing today is continuing the conversation around the two latest additions to the game, the Night Witch and the Bats. What we've done is gone through the daily discussion for both of those cards and picked out the comments that we thought were the most interesting. We're going to fire them back and forth and say whether we agree, we disagree, or somewhere in between. And here to go over that with me is a member of the subreddit's mod team.
My name is Carolyn, and I go by the screen name Caro in-game. My Twitter, you can find me at Caro Clash, and I also run the Twitter of the Clash Royale subreddit over at Reddit CR. I am a subreddit mod for the Clash Royale subreddit, so we do a lot of stuff with the community. So we run tournaments, we organize events in conjunction with Supercell, and we basically are a main forum for people in the Clash Royale community to express their concerns, share their memes, and just overall interact with other people who are like-minded and have the same interests as everyone else who plays Clash Royale, I suppose.
You can also catch Carolyn on her stream.
You can find me over at Twitch at Caro_CR. I don't stream that often. I don't really have a set schedule, but it's fun when I do decide to get on.
Something big that just ended this weekend was CCGS. Have you been paying close attention to that?
Yes, the Crown Championship Global Series. I was actually out of the country during the time when most people were competing in, I think, Phase 2, like the big 1,024-man elimination brackets. So I wasn't really able to participate in those, which kind of sucked, but I'm not the greatest player in any case, so I don't think my hopes were that high anyway. But I did have a chance to watch most of the battles throughout the 4 weeks of battle, and I've been pretty pleased with the way it's been run, and I do think that it's really, really cool that Supercell is taking steps to further the progression of competitive Clash Royale and promote it as more of an esport. I do think it was very well run. The production value was very, very high. They had some very notable members of the community who were either streamers, YouTubers, that kind of thing. And were brought in to participate. And from what I've heard from buddies and acquaintances who were at the event, who were either participating in the event as competitors or just going there to check it out, it seemed very well run, and the production value seemed very high.
Great. Yeah, I think the Rumham is the perfect guy to host that.
Right. I've actually been watching him from basically the very beginning since I started playing Clash Royale.
Yeah, he started, we did our first episode around Elixir Advantage because he was the first guy to really identify that and outline it, and he's got a pretty good grasp on game theory.
Yeah, for sure. He's definitely one of the top people I think of in my mind when I think of Clash Royale casting. I really, really like the way he casts. He's pretty engaging and does a really good job of explaining what's going on.
His commentary is really sharp. He's really good at identifying everything that's happening in the match.
Yeah, a lot of the other people there as well. There are some people who are a little bit lesser known, but I did watch the broadcast, and although they might not be the most experienced at playing the game, which I don't really blame them for, Clash Royale, I feel, is sometimes a little bit niche, but I did think that their casting was really on par up there.
Do you, what have been some of the most exciting matches that you've seen?
Oh gosh, I think C McHugh versus Batman, that was very exciting in the finals. Sorry, not in the finals, but both of them were probably considered the strongest players in the North American region, and pitting them against each other was very exciting. C McHugh versus Oxalate, I think Oxalate was sort of the underdog because CMC is known for being the first global the person who takes first global on ladder many seasons over, and so it was just really cool to see them duke it out. So these people who are so notable in the community and who are so sort of famous among their organizations, CMC representing Nova and Oxalate representing Hammers.
It was kind of a little bit crazy to see the meta shift so greatly during this competition too, with the release of the Night Witch and then the nerfs and the balance changes that happened.
Yeah, for sure. I remember during the phase 2 of CCGS, there was one really, really like distinct match that stuck out in my mind. It was Isopa, I believe, versus Rice, I think, in the finals. And Isopa, in the last game of the series, I think he was down 2-1.
So going back over this, we realized it's actually Isopa versus Tin 2 that we were talking about. And it actually became kind of a famous moment, so I'll play you some of this. It's on Hazard's stream. You'll hear him. And this copy that I have actually has a funny voiceover by the Rumham.
Howdy, partner, and welcome to a legend of Clash Royale.
This is a perfect example of what can happen when a new card, especially a broken card, is released in the middle of a competition.
This story takes place at the finals of a Crown Championship qualifier event. Popular streamer and personality Isopa had fought his way to the finals of the event.
Finals, Isopa vs. Tin 2, CCGS, NA 231. Got this pro commentary here.
Let's go,
Let's go!
Standing in his way was a man known as Tin 2, former tournament winner and quite a strong player himself. This was the first day that Night Witch was competing in tournament play, and boy was she broken.
This goes by pretty quick in the video. I'm just going to narrate the opening of the match. So the elixir hits 10, Tin 2 cycles his skeletons. Isopa splits a goblin gate. Tin 2 plays the log, and Isopa decides to pump up. He places a collector in front of his king's tower. It's now just 20 seconds in when, at the river,
Tin 2 placed a giant to block for her and a Night Witch behind. That Night Witch hid behind her giant, hid behind her bats, and soon enough, Isopa was no more.
63 seconds from the beginning of the match, and only 40 seconds since Tin 2 played his Night Witch, Isopa was 3 crowned and out of the qualifiers.
All hopes of him advancing to the top 8 for North America dashed on the rocks.
I didn't want to watch that.
No! 1 minute!
Some say you can still hear the lamentations of that nation's children.
God, no!
The day after, someone asked him if that deck would work for them, and he said, no, definitely not. I basically only won so hard that day because the Night Witch was so new and no one knew how to play around it yet. So he definitely wouldn't have recommended that deck for someone else playing afterwards.
And that, my friends, is the legend of the slaying of Isopa by the coward Night Witch. If you'd like to hear more
so obviously that was a big upset. Do you think like any other cards have affected the meta as strongly as the Night Witch just did? Like the first ones that come to mind for me, maybe just because they're so recent, is the Executioner and the E-Barbs that totally threw the meta for a loop.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was amazing, seeing how those cards have shifted and progressed in the meta. Executioner, for sure, when it was released, it was definitely broken. I remember this very, very strongly because I have been a long time sort of spellbait player. I think I've been playing a very similar deck since about September or October of last year. And I remember when Executioner was released, it was the bane of my existence because it just did so much damage and it had such a huge area of effect that anything I played was just instantly destroyed by the Executioner. It was the meta-defining card at the time, and it was just so broken. I think that it's in a good spot right now, but it's definitely interesting to see the way that cards are balanced and rebalanced and how they maintain an equilibrium.
Let's take a closer look at the Night Witch. This is a perfect segue because a lot of the conversation pivots around how the Night Witch so strongly affected the meta. Thanks to all of the Redditors who took part in this discussion, and I'll apologize now for every name that I mess up. So looks like the top voted comment in the Night Witch discussion is when you compare her to the regular witch, she costs less, has more HP, summons bats as she dies, can take a tower if left ignored, and does not get countered by ground targeting units. So in case you were debating which witch to put in your deck, always choose the Night Witch.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the Night Witch is better than the regular witch in almost every single situation. During early arenas, the witch is definitely very strong, because when you have like an early epic, the witch is one of the epics that you can unlock from your first from your first few chests when you complete the tutorial. So for sure, she's definitely very strong because of the way that levels scale. So her level is like a much higher equivalent in comparison to the commons, rares, and like just every single other card that new players have. But I think Supercell said that they are okay with certain cards being underpowered in high arenas but being very strong in early arenas. So the most notable example of which might be the Sparky. But I think the Night Witch can be used as like an arguable example of power creep. So for the people who don't really know what that is, it's when a card or something is released in your game that sets the power curve of the game higher. So the Night Witch is comparatively stronger in every single way to the Witch. So when you're debating between putting any single 4 elixir card in your deck, you have to compare it. Is this better than the Night Witch? Would my deck be better off if I had put the Night Witch in here? So for example, the Night Witch basically makes the regular witch obsolete. So when you're debating to put a supporting, air targeting, spawning distraction troop in your deck, there's no reason why I don't think you would ever really want to choose the regular witch over the Night Witch in like higher arenas if you're in Legendary, for instance.
Yeah. Power creep. Basically, you put out a way I've heard it described is like you put out a duplicate of a card that exists, but it's stronger. So now you're making these older cards obsolete.
Yeah.
And you're selling more gems.
Yeah, people like to joke about Supercell being greedy a lot.
I don't jump on the bandwagon with all of that, but there is some of the ways that they've handled the bats recently. I kind of think they're scamming it a little bit.
Do you think so?
The long wait that they've had after the bats challenges has been crazy, and then these like I would say really bad value like giant chest offers too. So like, okay, well you can wait 2 weeks, or you can take this bad offer, or you can spend like all your gems trying to get it in a challenge. That's only if you're bad like I am and you quit spending gems on that challenge, because me and Draft are not the best. So yeah, I think it's a little bit, they're really kind of stretching it out with the bats. I wish they would have come out maybe like in a week rather than like 2. What do you think?
Yeah, I do sort of wish that they had made the release time shorter, because with the last update, they definitely had way shorter times between the release of each card. I can't really say like I would know for sure why, but yeah, there's talks about that like around the community.
Yeah, I'm assuming you played the challenge and unlocked the bats like everyone else.
I actually wasn't able to play the challenge because I think it was away then.
Oh yeah.
So I didn't really get the chance to play. So Supercell.
Yeah.
Give me those bats.
Totally. Do you want to take a look at this next comment?
This next comment is by Nate. He says, she's great with beatdown decks simply because she outclasses minions at distracting infernos. Her constant wave of bats speed ahead of the tank at the best moments. If her bats served only this purpose, she would still be a staple of beatdown decks. However, for only 4 elixir, she also provides a ton of other value. Her bats deal insane amounts of DPS to tanks, Night Witch can counter a graveyard, and the melee Night Witch damage is nothing to scoff at. Major downside to her is the popularity of Executioner plus Tornado, which is steadily growing.
Would you think you agree pretty much? He nails it pretty well, Nate?
I think he hit the nail on the head, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, aside from being able to distract Inferno Towers, which is something that's almost essential in any beatdown deck, especially if you don't have Lightning or Zap, or Ice Spirit, I suppose, she is also a mini tank. So she's comparable to a mini P.E.K.K.A, which, by the way, is also 4 elixir. So she does provide comparable value, but even arguably way more value as a glass cannon who also is able to distract and deal huge DPS with the bats that she spawns constantly, which have a fast attacking rate, very fast move speed, and are able to completely counter a graveyard on its own, and then survive to put like a tank in front of it and go on a counter push. Definitely a very strong card, but I do agree that her hard counter is definitely Executioner and Tornado, which doesn't die to lightning and is able to clump together and destroy both the tank and the Night Witch behind it at once. And then the child comment there says, if 100% of people used Executioner Tornado, we will see Executioner Tornado bait Night Witch decks. Then the game becomes a Night Witch versus Executioner game.
Maybe. Yeah, I think it was an interesting comment for sure. I don't know if it would go that far, but I would be interested to see what Executioner Tornado bait deck would look like.
I don't think I've seen anything like that, but I'm interested to see if anyone comes up with something that would work well with that.
Mm-hmm.
If you do come up with a great guide, with a great deck, then I strongly suggest you post it to Reddit and maybe write a guide on it. Hint, hint. Another reason why the subreddit is so great, by the way, is that people are able to share their favorite decks and write guides for the meta-defining decks or things that are really, really interesting or counter the meta.
Absolutely. Now, this next comment talks about the bats, and this is Puno H. Bats are the real problem. Night Witch can be killed easily, but then you have to deal with 5 to 10 bats. So X-Nado is the only thing which can stop her when she's behind a huge tank. Yeah, mostly the bats. Like she hits pretty hard, but the bats are the biggest problem. I think they force you to deal with like 2 levels, and now you have to deal with the ground and the air at the same time.
Mm-hmm. It's she's a little bit frustrating to counter because when you have a slow glass cannon like the Night Witch that attacks slowly, normally your go-to counter for her would be something that is like a multiple of a troop that's able to distract it until your tower can finish it off. So, for example, skeletons would be an ideal counter to the mini P.E.K.K.A. Back when there were 4, at least, I think now that there are 3, the mini P.E.K.K.A. still gets 1 shot on your tower, or something like the Goblin Gang, which would be able to pull it to the center and distract it long enough for your tower to take it out. But because she spawns bats, when she's tanking for the tower, the bats are going to be able to kill your supporting troops, and that doesn't spell well for you because then your opponent is up a Night Witch, a couple of bats, and you're down a few elixir that you spent trying to counter it, and it's just very frustrating because she attacks on like 2 sides like that.
Right. One of the child comments there that I think was an interesting point from Blueberry, he says, Princess is a great answer to Night Witch. If you play Princess in the opposite lane, you force your opponent to log her or lose all the bats. I have used Princess to try to get around the bats. It's interesting. I don't know. I mean, 1 log and then that's all dealt with, and then you have a full strength Night Witch coming at you. So there are some situations I think that would work, but it's definitely not a hard counter.
I don't think so either. I think Princess nowadays, you basically only see her in spellbait decks. You used to be able to see her in like the 2.9 Mortar deck, the one that Woody popularized.
Yep.
Where she was a staple, but she has been phased out and replaced with, I believe, arrows in that specific deck.
I see.
And in bait decks, your opponent sort of like is forced to save their log for the Goblin Barrel if you are running a bait deck. So in that case, Princess might be a good answer. But I think nowadays in Legendary Arena, at least, most people are running 2 spells, I believe. Poison is now very popular, so you're able to get insane value by poisoning a Princess, which is just a -1 trade. But if you can clip other stuff, get the tower or like a pump, it's definitely very worth it.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've read that before, that log is so prevalent, it's so easy to take her out, that her only role really is sometimes to waste somebody's log in a log bait deck.
Yeah, for sure. She's definitely very annoying. She's the only card that can deal infinite damage to a tower if you leave her alone.
Koi AK-47 mentions down there, referring to X-Nado being the only thing that can stop the Night Witch. He says there's also Wiznado and Dragnado, which I don't know if I agree with. I think Wizard is kind of useless.
I do agree. Actually, Executioner probably power creep Wizard out of the meta once and for all, because like Executioner does basically everything the Wizard does, in addition to having more health, greater area, and just being sturdier overall.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't say I can say Wizard is a very great counter to Night Witch, but Baby Dragon, I think it does an okay job. It doesn't really pull the Night Witch, but Baby Dragon, I think it used to be one of the laughable cards that no one would really ever play, but now that it's received a couple of buffs, it's found a great place in the meta. So in Slash Yard decks, along with the Executioner and Tornado, it has a pretty comfortable spot for itself. It's pretty strong. And I do have it in quite a few of my decks.
Yeah, I agree. I think Baby Dragon is great.
Mm-hmm. Actually, the next comment here by Lackey Thundy says, Dragnado works, but it's not too reliable. And why would you use Wizard when there's a tougher, higher damage unit that can kill everything in its projectile radius? Yeah, echoing what I just said about the Executioner.
I think you nailed that.
Baby Dragon, I think that sometimes you find that the slash range is a little bit too small. So, for example, if it's distracted by a giant or something, the bats can sometimes creep up from behind and take out the baby dragon while it's focused on something else. Whereas with the Executioner, as long as it's in the path of the axe, they can get everything.
Right.
So definitely, I think Executioner is the way to go if you want a hard Night Witch counter.
Now our next comment talks about another counter to Night Witch, which is from Darkstar, who is one of the mods who helps run the discussions.
Yeah, he says, I usually use a Knight plus Poison when she is behind a Golem, and it counters her quite well. Usually nets a positive trait as well, since people will usually support Golem with more than just a Night Witch. If I don't have Poison in hand, I'll usually Tornado the bats to death if there's other value to be had, and there usually is. If you carry a cheap spell, it's not that hard to deal with. Very good suggestion. I'm usually a little bit wary about using a defensive poison because when I have poison in my deck, it's usually for like a graveyard deck, and you definitely, depending on the deck that your opponent runs, I definitely prefer to keep poison and save it for when I go on offense, because graveyard poison, and when you have a tank in front supporting it, is very, very difficult to counter and usually gets a lot of damage, if not the entire tower for me. So I'm definitely wary about using it when you can't get the tower or get any additional value, but it's definitely a very strong card that you can use circumstantially defensively.
And Penniless Dragon says, if that's your only counter, they should play around you easily in the next push, which is a good point too.
Yeah, maybe they would like try to space their troops out better, or like, I don't know, wait for you to use the poison on something else and then catch you off guard and then like put Golem at the bridge or something.
Totally.
Which has actually been a complaint by a lot of top players, that now a lot of people are playing their cards in a bridge spam, quote unquote, fashion. So basically putting 10 elixir red at the bridge when you've accidentally overcommitted, or even when you haven't overcommitted and just have the wrong cards in your cycle. A really big complaint. So for example, something like just like a giant minion horde at the bridge is very, very frustrating to deal with because it doesn't feel good to lose against. Like, I don't mind losing against like a very well thought out push where they counter my cards perfectly and then go on a counterattack, but it's very frustrating to lose when you have like the worst 4 cards in your starting hand and someone plays like a giant balloon at the bridge.
Yeah, it's the same feeling as like E-Barbs, where it's just like you just drop this massive push and there's nothing you can do.
Right, yeah. So if you have like 3 spells in your hand and like, for example, like a defensive building or something, it doesn't feel good.
No.
Darkstar replies to his comment, you can use Mega Minion for the Night Witch and Inferno Tower for the Golem and Tornado to kill the bats if needed. Definitely a solid example of defense, but I think it depends on your deck because not everyone's running these cards. I think Inferno Tower has sort of fallen out of favor. Defensive buildings in general. I haven't been seeing them as much lately.
Lightning.
Yeah, lightning for sure.
Yeah. This makes me wonder what Darkstar's deck is. He says he has Mega Minion, Tornado, and Poison, and Night. I can't really place that deck. Does anything come to mind for you?
I was thinking Expo, but that doesn't make sense. I'm not sure.
There's a bit here that talks about the conversation comes a lot back to ex-NATO. But I think the thing I would want to take away from this is that like this meta right now is forcing ex-NATO to be super prevalent, and quite a few people keep saying like, I don't want the meta to be so unbalanced that I am forced to play either Golem Night Witch or ex-NATO. Do you think it's that extreme? Do you think that's kind of what it's starting to become?
I see it in 2 different perspectives. I think that diversity in the metagame is very, very healthy for the game. However, from the competitive side of things, I've been hearing from a lot of pro players that they dislike how it seems like people are playing certain deck archetypes, but only a few different decks that seem to all sort of counter each other like rock, paper, scissors, which has just sort of been the way it is for a little while now. So people have been complaining, and I've seen a lot of pro players either retiring or taking breaks from the game, saying that they don't enjoy playing the game anymore, because it seems like on top level ladder where everyone has sort of reached the skill ceiling, it feels like you don't lose because the other person outplayed you. You lose because of a deck matchup, or if the matchup happens to be sort of even or even favorable for you, you have the wrong cycle in your starting hand, which causes you to eventually lose, because like these tiny minute things are really exacerbated when everyone is at the same level of skill. So while I think diversity in decks and cards is really great, a lot of pro players are saying that they actually preferred when the meta was like in the giant poison era last summer, where everyone was playing the same deck, and it came down to who could outplay each other using the same deck, which I find very interesting.
That's really interesting. I didn't think of it like that. That has been a huge complaint. Like, I haven't been feeling that, and I've been seeing that, which is like, I don't like playing rock, paper, scissors. Like, I don't like starting a match and being like, okay, well, I can't beat this.
I haven't been playing ladder as much, honestly, because I feel like I've been getting burnt out a little bit myself, just seeing the kind of decks, because it sometimes does feel like you're matched against your hard counter, even if like there's no evidence that Supercell is actively searching for cards that specifically counter you, or maybe it just so happens that I'm facing a deck that is just so happened to be built to beat me.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one. I don't know how they're going to solve that. I guess we're going to have to wait and see.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly, there was a tournament a while back. I can't remember who. I think it was Sir Tag who was casting it, and it was back when there was the old school challenge,
Yep.
where you could only use the cards that were released when the game just came out in your deck, and you would like play cards. And there was a tournament, like a bracketed tournament with a lot of pro players, in which they had to use those same cards and play against each other. And I found that every single win condition that was in the game when it was released was used, and I felt like everything sort of had a fair matchup against each other. So I remember someone did use Giant Skeleton and even like thrashed the other person using Giant Skeleton, like a card that no one uses at the top nowadays. So I think that maybe it's because of the appearance of cards like Graveyard that are so meta defining that it sort of overshadows all of these older win conditions and forces you to have like a more limited number of win conditions, possibly resulting in the rock, paper, scissors that people complain about so much. So maybe for competitive events in the future, a way to go would be banning certain cards from use, which might lead to more fair deck matchups.
I think that would be really interesting. I think that's a cool solution for that.
Yeah, though I'm not a game theory expert in any sense of the word, so take my ideas with a grain of salt, but I think it's an interesting idea to explore.
I remember, especially back when I was talking to Rumham, he compared Clash Royale a bit to Magic the Gathering. Do you know that game?
I do know it. Can't say I've ever played it, but I've read a little bit about it.
What they were doing as new generations of cards would come out, they would phase out the older ones, and I think like on one side that made people continue buying cards, but on the other it was phasing out these crazy game ruining combos that you could make.
Really, that's really interesting.
That's what your comment kind of made me think of. I think that that would be an interesting solution, or if people just hosted competitions where they set the rules, like even if it's not something that gets built into the game, the competition says, okay, this is going to be this type of gameplay. Might be a way to make some more balanced competition.
That's really interesting, actually. With Clash Royale, unlike Magic the Gathering, the devs can go into the game and like retroactively change the stats of cards that need to be balanced instead of just getting rid of them like altogether. They can just phase them out, and like instead of phasing them out, they can change around the stats. Unlike Magic, where you can't really, once you release the card in like a pack or something, you can't change the stats retroactively.
Right.
So I think that's interesting. An interesting way of going about it.
This one by Gigantuar. He says, I don't know what changes she needs. By herself, she's fine, but part of the problem is that she synergizes so well with cards like Golem or even Giant. Instead of nerfing her, I'd rather see a hard counter to get a buff. I don't like the buffing a counter idea, but I think part of the problem is her synergy. With a card like Golem that people do kind of accuse of being overpowered as well.
I actually watched this like series on YouTube called Extra Credits, where they discuss like game theory and things like power creep. And I'm sorry, I keep going back to power creep, but I just think it's such an interesting concept that applies so well to Clash Royale. Definitely when other cards are added to the game, it's not necessarily the card itself that's so overpowered, but maybe like the synergies that make it so strong and such a force to be reckoned with. So with poison, it was sort of the same thing when people figured out that, hey, giant and poison is really, really strong. This becomes like super overpowered, even though the card itself wasn't necessarily that bad. I can't say I would really want an executioner buff at this point because I think it does pretty well like right now, but I would love to see more ways of taking out the Night Witch that don't involve nerfing her directly.
There's a comment here from the Dankest Prince, and I've seen him make some great
username.
Yeah, and great feedback before. I know that if I see his name, I will usually read the comment. Everyone is saying she is OP, yet every time I see a battle that has more than 2 splash troops, I get wrecked. And she has lots of weaknesses, but people are not willing to change their decks. But that's what balance changes are, to make people stop using the same decks. I think what I wanted to look at there was, what do you think? Do you think that's what balance changes are?
Definitely. Supercell has said before that when balancing cards, they look more at use rates than the relative power or like subjective opinion of how strong, quote unquote, something is. So Night Witch, I think in the last, in the tier list series written by Kairo's Time, he paired up with Stats Royale and looked at the win rates of the Night Witch in the top, like in competitive play. Mm-hmm. And they saw that her win rate was insanely high. I believe it was 60 something percent, like 65%, something like that. And a use rate like that definitely justifies a nerf.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with the Skeletons. The Skeletons had an insanely high usage rate. And Woody's last card snapshot, I believe it was up to 70 something percent in the top players' decks. That's insane. When you have a card like that, that instantly makes your deck better when you put it in, that's how you know that something is due for a nerf. Even if people really liked the Skeletons before and didn't really find it overpowered in their own opinions, when you have something like that that decreases the variety of cards that you see in Clash Royale, that's what tells Supercell that something is wrong.
I totally agree. I love Skeletons, and you don't get that problem where they seem overpowered, but their usage rate is points out the problem. And I'm wondering if Bats is going to end up being something similar. We'll have to see.
Mm-hmm. I don't think enough people have it right now to be able to say definitively. I think when the regular old Joes like you and me who don't have the Bats yet get it and see how it works with their decks, then we'll be able to see how well it works. But I do think that Bats are going to be very strong. They're going to be 4 units, so they are going to be able to, for example, take out a lone musketeer. So yeah, I'm excited to see what happens.
Totally. This is one of the responses to that. I think it's maybe the last one we'll touch on from here. Vapor UHC says Lightning is the real cancer because it kills pretty much every viable counter to the current Golem Night Witch meta, except Executioner. I am not willing to put Executioner NATO in every single one of my decks just to counter this now mindless strategy. I think that's a good point, is that Lightning is part of the problem, and we kind of touched on that.
Mm-hmm. Alternatively, Lightning can be a counter to Night Witch as well, because it does one-shot it, although you will have to deal with the Bats afterwards.
Now let's talk about Bats. As you may have noticed, Carolyn and I said that we didn't have them yet. That's because we recorded like a day or two before they officially came out. We obviously have them since. I've had a chance to try them out, and I have some video recommendations. I'll be back with that after this discussion. Somebody pointed out that this is the first card to receive a nerf before it was even released. To which somebody responded, the only one we know about, which is a good point.
That's true, yeah. I think it comes down to them actually releasing the stats of it before. I don't know. The stats are subject to change, but I think this is the first time it's really been changed before the release.
Totally. And I think it just happened because they were part of Night Witch, and so the stats had to be released well in advance.
And I do think it was linked to the nerf of the Skeletons, actually, because when you compare the Skeletons and the Bats, like, when you have 4 skeletons and 5 bats, you're just receiving 1 more bat and the ability to target air and fly for 1 more elixir. But when you have 2 bats, when you have like 3 skeletons and 5 bats, that becomes, there's like a power like gap there. So it definitely was, I think, warranted to be able to keep the scale of the power in check.
Yeah, and skeletons kind of had it coming, like we were talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so Dark Star kicks off this thread. So he says, what do you like about bats? It's a cheap flying card that can be very useful on defense, especially against ground hitting units. I also like that the spawn kind of spreads out, letting you surround splash units like Executioner quite easily. 268 air/ground damage per second for 2 elixir is quite good, and makes up for them being very squishy. Overall, a pretty solid card.
Yeah, pretty good TLDR of what the bats are.
Yeah.
Air skeletons. That's all there is to them.
Totally.
He says, what do you dislike about the bats? And then he says, it's hard to get a positive elixir trade killing them, especially on defense if your push doesn't have air splash units. Zap is the only spell to kill them for a neutral trade when they are on defense if your push can't hit air or the air hitting card is distracted. Yeah, I agree. Zap, for a while, had been out of the meta since Log had been so strong for the past few months, many months. With the recent nerfs to Log and the addition of the bats, which indirectly buffs Zap seems like it's finding its way back up there in the usage rates as a low-cost spell that has the advantage of being able to target air over the Log and being easily leveled up, I might add.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's going to affect Spellbait in an interesting way as well.
For sure. I think Log was a harder counter to Spellbait than Zap was, but Zap is definitely still very strong. Some people run both Log and Zap, which makes my life hell, but it's a good combo for sure.
Diamond Wolf was one of those. I'm pretty sure when we talked, in his deck he had Zap and Log.
Oh yeah, it's the Diamond Wolf deck. I think Nick and Knight made a comment about him always running the same deck. I saw an interesting post actually that said with the addition of the bats, it's now possible to make an all air deck. So you have Lava Hand Balloon, minions, Mega Minion, and bats. So you have every single card in your deck being a flying card.
Well, we're going to see how fun that is because Lavaloon is still interesting.
Though Execution NATO does hard counter it. Gosh.
Just another reason.
Right. The next comment under him says, should have been 5 bats, 4 bats for 2 elixir just aren't enough. Supercell's playtesting really amuses me. He has negative 20 points on this comment, so I reckon it wasn't very well received by the community.
Yeah, totally. And then True Royal Oreo says, bats are flying dutes. 1 elixir equals 3 dutes, 2 elixir equals 4 dutes with wings.
Yeah, I think it's fair. It's like a fair step up from the skeletons.
And the rest we're only going to see through, just see how the meta reacts to it.
Mm-hmm. David the Demon 1 says, they're extremely viable in taking down Balloon, can distract minions, takes down Knight, Valk, and other mini-tanks for just 2 elixir. All in all, a great card. To which the next comment simply just says, Zap. Yeah, it does get a lot of value, but you don't necessarily want to waste your Zap on it, I think, especially if you're against a deck that would require you to save Zap for something else. So maybe if they're running Goblin Barrel and you need the Zap to take out the Goblin Barrel because it's 1 level higher, you probably wouldn't want to waste your Zap on that, especially since it's just a neutral elixir trade, like 2 for 2.
Right.
But if they are left alone, they get insane value. So it's sort of like skeletons, except I guess it's possible to make a positive elixir trade against the bats with like the Ice Spirit or something.
Oh yeah. Jägermeister then says, yeah, but until now, Lava Hound / Balloon decks mostly carried lightning and arrows for Inferno Towers and minions. It can be hard for them to fit Zap in as well. Or you can be running a Zap bait deck and punish them for using it. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, for sure. Lava Hound decks, they usually do carry arrows and lightning, and I don't think they usually have much room for a third spell. I'm not sure what the popular Lava Hound balloon deck is nowadays, but I don't think I would want 3 spells in a lava loon deck. I don't know what I would use it on, except for in this very circumstantial case where they have bats and I don't want to use my arrows on it, you know?
Right, and then it's really not worth nudging another card just for that case.
Mm-hmm.
It continues on from here, and people say like, okay, well, what if they start carrying Zap because everybody starts playing bats instead of minions, and then minions will come back because the Zap won't quite kill them, and the conversation pictures this like cyclical nature where like, oh, well, people will use Zap if people use bats, and then if people use Zap, people anyway. Yeah, sorry, do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's exactly how the metagame is supposed to work any case. So I'll be interested to see how that works out.
I think that one's fair. That will just mean that there's some variety in that case because there's not necessarily one that's better than the other. It just becomes what you are more comfortable with using.
Mm-hmm. From what I've seen in big tank decks, I do think that minions are usually actually the better choice for if you want to distract an Inferno Tower, because even though they cost 2 elixir more, they deal a lot more damage. And they're a lot sturdier than the bats because they take 3 shots to be killed from the tower. So in theory, bats sound like a really great counter to Inferno Towers on offense, but they're one shot by your opponent's towers. So when you put them in the middle to distract the Inferno Tower, the other tower just picks them off one by one, whereas they take 3 shots to kill the minions.
Right.
Which means that they can survive for much longer and distract the Inferno Tower for long enough for your like giant or golem or like supporting troops to take out the Inferno Tower.
And I think what this scenario doesn't acknowledge is Minion Horde. You would definitely still rather have the arrows for Minion Horde.
Oh yeah. Minion Horde has been a bane in Three Musketeer decks, I think, especially where it's used as like a fireball or like big spell bait for like fireball or poison, so you can put down the 3 muskies without fear.
Oh yeah, totally. Do you want to check out the comment from Noodles here?
Yep. Noodles says, the bats aren't as OP as I thought they would be. Bats might seem OP with Night Witch because she can spawn so many of them. To which the child comment replies by another thrown away, says, I guess I'm alone in my opinion, but I don't think bats are even very good. Minions are so much stronger for 1 elixir more, and skeletons and Ice Spirit are twice as good at cycling. Very solid points by both of them. Yeah.
Totally.
Minions, I did say that they are a lot stronger for 1 more elixir. I think that they're just so much hardier because they take like 2 shots to be killed by Musketeers. So again, in that offensive situation where you want to distract the Inferno Tower and any air targeting troops that your opponent put on defense, bats just aren't really sturdy enough, I think. They don't have the same survivability that minions do.
I'm wondering if they might, their main role might be as a cycle card. Like they'll fit great into like really fast cycle decks.
That's a good point, but for 2 elixir, I think people would normally still rather have skeletons or Ice Spirit to cycle, though, and I think that having both bats and skeletons in a deck, even if just a cycle, might be a little bit redundant because they fill basically the same role, being high damage dealing cheap troops.
Yeah, good point. So Bad Food Man says they have some significant advantages over skeletons: move speed, number, can hit air, and can't be targeted by ground troops. They have a significant downside to skeletons: 1 more elixir and can't be targeted by ground troops. I think that's a great point. The ability for skeletons to distract troops is like, almost like their main reason I think they're so valuable. Yeah.
Definitely skeletons, you can use it to like kite Mega Minions, for example, and they are very valuable. I can't say which one I prefer right now, not having had enough experience playing with the bats, but definitely they have their upsides and downsides. Elite Barbarians, I think, is a major problem for most people in the 3,000 and 4,000 range, and skeletons, I would 1,000,000% prefer having skeletons in my deck against E-Barbs if they were the bane of my existence than bats, because kiting them, it's just so great because it takes so much time for them to get to the center and then kill all the skeletons. And if you have like an Ice Spirit or something too, which is a very popular combo if you have both of these cards for cycling, it just takes care of the Elite Barbs like nothing at all.
Totally. That's a great combo.
Hayes Cooper says, the fact that they can't be targeted by ground troops is definitely more negative than positive in my opinion. Yeah, because much of their value is derived from their distraction ability. And in the case of ground troops, even splash troops like Bowler, properly executed skeleton placement can provide very good distraction and largely, if not entirely, shut them down. Yeah, the ability of skeletons to surround cards is definitely one of the best things about them. It makes their skill ceiling really, really high. There's so many attacks that you can perform with the skeletons that you just really can't with the bats.
Yeah, like even like how, well, especially when you had 4 skeletons, you could take out a musketeer.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's like +3 positive elixir trade right there.
Yeah, yeah. With bats, it's a little bit different. Like you could take out like an executioner, with the skeletons when there are 4 of them, but I don't believe that you can take out an executioner with bats before it gets one hit on your tower.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the way that the splash works and the way like the air troops are, because like their hitboxes don't interact with the executioners, so that it's able to slash more of them at once.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Let's scroll ahead to the comment by Star Kawa.
He says, I think it's a balanced card, but it needs to fit in decks that can get synergy from it. So for example, Zap Bait and decks that have Minion Horde, etc. Yeah, definitely air with other air cards have really great synergy. So like the Omnipresent Lava Loon or Zap Bait, especially since it's very fast, it synergizes very well as something that can rush the tower really quickly. So like Miner and Bats, I can see that being a really great combo that rushes in, and if your opponent doesn't have a good solution for them, that can take out the Bats, so you can deal massive damage to the tower.
Mm-hmm. The conversation kind of then gets into the special offers, which we kind of touched on, saying like for to buy that giant chest you get at least 115 bats, but they're commons. Like I just back to us saying I just don't, it's not a great value offer, and I think people have had a lot of complaints about the value in these offers that Supercell has been giving lately.
Yeah, I haven't personally gotten the offer. I feel like there are much better uses of my gems.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how much does it cost again? I think it's like 100 something gems, or is it more?
It's
because
insane.
I believe it was like a giant chest.
Yeah, it's a giant chest. I feel like I'm gonna say like 500 or something dumb. I'm
That's
booting up right
insane.
now. Is it still there? Oh, it's gone. Okay, but what does a giant chest cost? Yeah, 520. I think it was the same. It was just it
Was
you
it?
had an opportunity to get bats as well. It was the only
Yeah, and you could get like bonus bats too. Like you could get like a mega bonus, that kind of
right.
thing. Yeah, I feel like even if you're like an average or even below average player, playing grand challenges with those gems would net you much better value, both in the cards that you get and the coins that you get from playing the challenges, or even just buying a legendary chest. Like, would I rather have like 100 more bats, which you can easily get just from playing the game, because with like the algorithm that like evens out the number of cards that you have,
Mm-hmm.
you would like get a lot of bats really quickly. Anyway, I would much rather even buy a legendary chest for that many gems.
I have a problem with that because you don't know what you're gonna get. I've saved legendary chests before, like before the Night Witch came out. I was like, oh yeah, hopefully I'll get the Night Witch, and then I think it was actually a Sparky. So I'm like, I'm never okay with spending those gems to maybe get a Sparky.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I feel like I've been rather lucky in my legendary chests. I remember buying legendary chests when the legendary chests were first released. And I remember getting, at that point, I hadn't gotten any legendaries yet. This was a long time ago. Oh my gosh. But the first 2 legendaries I got, both of them were out of legendary chests I bought from the shop, were the 2 legendaries I wanted the most. So I feel like I'm rather lucky when it comes to that, but not everyone can say the same.
Yeah. And then they kind of talk about what we talked about there, is this massive gap that they're putting in, the 2-week gap between the challenge and the release.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we kind of covered that. So Orwellian Novice points out that they are a great anti-graveyard card. And to which Sam Kuteli, I'm going to say, says most cards in the game are fantastic against naked graveyards. This is like saying Skarmy is good against graveyard, sure, but 1 poison tick and they're dead. So yeah, I agree.
I agree for sure.
Yeah.
Basically, every single Swarm card does amazingly against Graveyard, but the most popular combo Graveyard Poison takes out, I would say, like 99% of those great Graveyard counters. I mean, like, realistically, anyone who's playing a Graveyard who has half a brain wouldn't just leave your bats alone and just send in a lone Graveyard against your bats.
Totally. Hayes Cooper, oh no, we got Liars Everywhere, says underwhelming card, and then goes on to say, they're fun to play in a super cheap deck, but that's about it. Not really viable in my opinion. Probably because as a common, if they were viable in tournament standard, people would cry and cry and cry about overleveled bats in the ladder. Yeah, I don't think so. Kind of like, I think we mentioned that before, is people aren't going to complain about an overleveled common card for 2 elixir.
Yeah, I think it's mostly the win conditions that people complain about. The 2 things that stick out in everyone's minds being Elite Barbarians and the Royal Giant.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I personally think is very, very underwhelming and underpowered at tournament standard, but is still something that people complain a lot about when it's on ladder.
Did we see those cards at all in CCGS?
I don't think Elite Barbarians were played at all.
No.
I think one person might have played Royal Giant. I can't remember who, but I feel like someone did play it.
Hayes Cooper kind of shuts that comment down the same way we just did, and says, I think they would work well in a minor cycle deck. What do you think?
Yeah, in Minor Poison, I can see it definitely being really good, offering cheap air support and great damage per second at a low cost.
So the Green Hog, in my opinion, they are too weak for 4 bats as 2 elixir. It should be 5 bats, but with slower speed or the same speed. We'll wait to see, but I tend to not agree with that.
I think so too. I'm not sure about the speed. I do think that the speed is an interesting part of it that sets it apart from skeletons a little bit more, being that they're very fast compared to the skeletons fast. And I think that being very fast is what makes them pretty annoying because they can rush ahead at your tower and get your tower really quickly, as opposed to skeletons, which don't offer the same kind of pressure when you have them like behind a tank.
Yeah. You want to grab the next one?
Yeah. Tour 357, he says, bats are pretty good against everything. They're also cheap, so good for a fast cycle. They're just flying skeletons, so next update, bats -1, update after, bats +1, update thereafter, bats -1, supercells repeating themselves. Funny.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, just predicting that we're going to have that whole Larry scenario.
We'll see how it goes. I think that before their global release, it's hard to predict where it'll go, but hopefully they'll find a good spot for themselves, unlike skeletons. Skeletons are in like a weird spot where like at 3 they're slightly underwhelming, but at 4 they're arguably, well, undeniably overpowered.
They have to find a niche, which is kind of good. I think that's maybe a good balance, is these cards aren't too strong and they don't fit in everything, but when they find their niche, they're really strong.
The next comment actually says this. Freeze OP says, bats really only have one use to distract. That's basically it. This is why I think skeletons might be better. Bats can be used on offense, but they are killed too easily. As a distraction, like I said, like its interaction with an Inferno Tower is, I think, a little bit underwhelming. So maybe adding one more bat could be a good change for it in the future, depending on how it settles in.
Yeah, they might still offer too much value for like ground troops though. You know, like just being able to chew up a hog before he gets to the tower.
Yeah. Sexy Trap. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Sexy Trap says it's going to replace skeletons in the meta, in his opinion. And then the next comment under it says that he can't see it doing that because skeletons are used for ground and flying distraction. I don't know if it can replace skeletons entirely, because with skeletons, I believe Wings, the pro player, said something about skeletons being really great for preemptive like pressure in your lane. So when you split skeletons in the back when it was 4 at least, and no one really wants to send in a hog, for instance, against like skeletons that are on your side, because you can't justify in any way sending in a log or a zap to take out those skeletons just so your hog can get in 1 or 2 more hits, because that sets you so far back in elixir when you spent like 0.5 on those skeletons and you're spending like 2 on that log. which is such a valuable card that you want to save for something else that your opponent wants to use against you later. So bats are more justifiably zapped and countered by a spell because they're just really annoying to deal with, especially on like a counter push. So I can't say it will replace them, but who knows?
Yeah, man, the ability for skeletons to kite air troops too.
Right, yeah. With bats, you can't do the same thing. You can't kite anything with it. There's no troop that exists that can be kited by the bats.
Yeah, good point, because they will track anything in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Tile New says, looks like the meta is going to be spell bait with the I in parentheses, so like spell bat.
I don't think I've seen any decks that are spell bait with the bats, though I do think they would synergize very well, like a cheap cycling card. I was actually debating using it in my own decks, but seeing as I don't have it yet, I think it's yeah. I'll see. Though Spellbait has sort of fallen out of favor, what with all of the Three Musketeers, Poison, Graveyard, which like does very strongly against it.
Mm-hmm, totally.
And Executioner Tornado. Because like once you like pull the Goblin Barrel to the King Tower with Tornado, you're kind of done for.
C. McHugh brought back that Spellbait deck that he favors.
Mm-hmm.
What do you?
I think he played against Godslayer, who's known for running Lava Loon. I think in an interview with Godslayer, he said he didn't expect CMC to pull out something like Spellbait, even if it is the hard counter to Lava Loon, which he's renowned for playing, because Spellbait had run out of favor. But it definitely is very good against certain decks. I think a big part of being a competitive player is definitely knowing your opponent and knowing what they're going to play. Even if it's arguably not the most ethical thing to do, it's what great players do, like networking and communicating with others and studying your opponent. Like, don't play the game, play the man, right, is what they say.
Yeah, good point.
Actually, some players like Surgical Goblin are well known for trying to psych out their opponents and saying like, hey, I'm going to play this deck in the next match, and seeing whether or not they take them seriously and play like a counter to it, or assume that they're trying to fake them out and playing the same deck that they were playing before.
No way.
Yeah, mind games.
So we got one more here. Do you want to handle this one? It's a long one, and you seem to be reading way more clearly than me.
Curse 3242 says, actually, this card is OP and most people don't know it. Only Zap is a thing. I have level 9 bats now, as I'm clearly very good with cards like bats, as I'm a Hog Cycle player. I don't use Hog Cycle, but use bats now. They're devastating. They have literally the best move speed I've seen so far. Only Zap is a problem. Especially it's needed, and that's why I said it would be the most OP card if Zap didn't kill it. But when sometimes I play with people without Zap, they have literally no choice to attack. It might be a draw, but I will never lose. And if you Zap, use Skelly Army if you use it. The Hog plus Bats is very good, as generally you have to deploy Hog a second earlier as Bats move fast, but they will overdo the Hog in speed and counter Inferno, Skellies, etc. Very awesome and balanced card. I think his thoughts are a little bit all over the place, but he has some really good explanations of what he uses the bats for in his deck and the synergies. So he definitely uses it as Zap bait in his deck, along with the Skeleton Army. So the Skeleton Army, if they don't have Zap or like a cheap spell in rotation, then it gets insane value on defense. It can take out like 12 elixir pushes, no problem. So like bats again, it puts that pressure on your opponent where they can't really justify using their high value spells like Zap, and you can get really good value with the bats there. So no matter what, you kind of end up ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was, I think I outlined that one because he kind of like gave some different examples than other people had with the bats there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So bats have been out for a little while now. So here's my synopsis. They are still just flying skeletons. Don't expect too much from them. But like skeletons, they get most of their value out of being a distraction and just cheap DPS. They can also be great for baiting out Zap, and they're a cheap way to add an air element to a push or defense. Similar to how we said the Night Witch is so strong because she attacks on both the air and ground levels, bats are a cheap way to add that element. And sometimes, like skeletons, if they're tanked for and they can even make it to your opponent's tower, they get you crazy value. The bats are even a little bit better at doing this because of their very fast move speed. Now, against naked troops crossing the bridge, they can also make for a lot of positive elixir trades. If you haven't seen it, check out the Orange Juice video on how bats counter everything. Most of those interactions are straightforward, but there's definitely a few that you should watch the video for. I'll just mention the two most interesting ones here. Now, in the episode, we said that you can't surround an executioner with bats and take him out the way that you could when you had 4 skeletons. But there's actually a way around it. If when the executioner crosses the bridge, you place your bats 1 tile to the side of him, 1 will appear over his head and 3 will appear to the side. He'll first turn away to take out that 1, while the other 3 and your tower do damage. He'll then have enough time to turn and take out 1 more before he's done, plus 3 elixir trade. Now the other one is the E-Wiz. Because he shoots from both hands, he can take out 2 bats at a time, and it ends up being that he takes out your bats and still manages to get a hit on your tower. But if as he crosses the bridge, you place your bats 1 tile in front of your tower, only one of the bats will be in range at first. He's going to waste his first shot on that 1, the next shot will be for 2, and then he's still going to have to spend his third shot taking out your final bat. That buys you enough time for your tower to take him out. Check out the video, there's a link to it on our website, crownpodcast.com. We've also got a video from Tag where he tries out 3 new bats decks. A 3 Musketeer Miner cycle with bats, Hog E-Wiz cycle with bats, and a Giant Miner Air Swarm deck with bats, minions, and minion horde. The videos are in the show notes. Thanks so much to Carolyn for joining us, and also thanks to Darkstar and Diamond Wolf for their help. Music was provided by Jay Haas. You can find us on Twitter at Crown Podcast. Send your comments and feedback to the king at crownpodcast.com. And please subscribe and leave a review in the podcast app of your choice. Until next time, you've been listening to The Crown, the Clash Royale podcast.
I didn't want to watch that.
No!